I was 28, working as a finance executive in a fast-paced firm downtown, engaged to a man who ticked every box. Aaron, charming, supportive, dependable. From the outside, it looked like I had everything under control. My coworkers envied my steady climb up the corporate ladder, and my friends often said I carried myself with a kind of quiet confidence that only comes from knowing who you are and where you're going. But no one knew what it took to hold all that together. It was my sister's engagement party that shattered the illusion. Everything had been meticulously planned: soft lights, champagne flutes, laughter echoing off the garden walls. I wore a pale blue dress Aaron had picked out, and I smiled for photos, holding on to that perfectly polished version of myself until she arrived. My mother, late, as always, and already tense. I should have known better. I should have felt it coming. She walked straight up to me, holding a cup of coffee someone had handed her. I started to say hello, but before the words even left my mouth, she threw the coffee in my face. Piping hot. It splashed across my cheek, burned my neck, and soaked into the fabric clinging to my collarbone. Gasps rippled through the garden. Someone screamed. I stood there, frozen, not from the pain, but from the way it all came rushing back. Every buried memory, every hidden wound. This wasn't about coffee. It never was. That moment cracked something open. The image I had spent years building shattered right there under the fairy lights. And I realized I couldn't pretend anymore. Not to myself. Not to Aaron. Not to anyone. People always say no one can hurt you like family. But some of us know that's not a metaphor. It's a history written into your skin, your voice, the way you flinch when someone raises a hand too fast. What happened that night wasn't random. It was the surface breaking open, revealing everything that had been festering underneath. If you've ever carried a story like this, you're not alone. Like this, share it, tell your truth. Someone else needs to know they aren't the only one. I grew up in a modest two-bedroom house on the south side of Chicago. It wasn't the kind of home that felt warm or filled with laughter, but it was clean, orderly, and quiet, too quiet sometimes. My father worked long hours at a warehouse and rarely spoke unless spoken to. He wasn't unkind, just invisible. Like wallpaper, always there, never noticed. My mother filled every space he left silent. She was sharp, domineering, and impossible to please. She could switch from charming to cruel in a heartbeat, and you never knew which version of her you were going to get. From as early as I can remember, there was a clear divide between me and my younger sister, Madison. Madison was the golden child. She was delicate, pretty, always just helpless enough to draw sympathy and praise. My mother adored her. Everything she did was celebrated, from her average report cards to her off-key piano recitals. Meanwhile, I was expected to excel. Anything less than perfect was treated as a personal failure. I remember once bringing home a B+ in 8th grade math. I was proud of it. Math had never come naturally to me, and I'd worked hard. But when I handed my report card to my mother, she barely looked at it before slapping it onto the kitchen table. Madison got an A in science, she said flatly, as if that erased everything I'd done. My father said nothing, just kept reading the paper, like I wasn't even in the room. That was the rhythm of our house. Madison could do no wrong, and I could never do enough. I learned early that love in our home came with strings. If I wanted affection, I had to earn it. If I wanted peace, I had to shrink myself. Be the adult. Be quiet. Be useful. So I became useful. I learned how to predict my mother's moods, how to clean the kitchen to her standards, and how to compliment Madison without sounding resentful. And most of all, I learned how to disappear into achievement. School became my escape hatch. It was the only place where effort translated into reward, where people saw me, not as the shadow of my sister, but as someone with her light. I threw myself into academics, straight as honor society's internships. I got a scholarship to Northwestern and left the day after high school graduation. I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I told myself I was free. But freedom isn't the same as healing. And distance doesn't undo damage. I spent years chasing perfection, thinking that if I just succeeded enough, I could overwrite the past. That if I built a life that looked perfect, maybe I could finally feel good enough. But you can't outrun what's wired into you. Not forever. Looking back now, I realize Madison wasn't to blame. She was a child, too, just playing the role assigned to her. The real divide wasn't between me and my sister. It was between me and the idea that I had to earn my worth while others were simply handed theirs. And that realization, that quiet, crushing truth, didn't hit me until far too late. Until the coffee. Until the sting. Until the mask I'd worn my whole life cracked wide open. I applied to college in secret. My mother had made it clear she expected me to stay close. Maybe enroll in a community college, live at home, help out with Madison, find a reasonable job that didn't make me think too much of myself. But I knew if I stayed, I'd never breathe freely. So I filled out applications late at night, hiding them under my mattress. I wrote essays by the glow of my desk lamp while the rest of the house slept. When I got accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship, I didn't tell anyone right away. I just stared at the acceptance letter in silence, letting the feeling of possibility soak through my skin. When I finally told my parents, my mother barely looked up. "I hope you're not expecting us to pay for that," she said, voice flat, disapproving. I wasn't. I never had. I pieced it all together myself: grants, student loans, part-time jobs on campus. I worked early shifts at the library, ran spreadsheets for grad students, and tutored economics to underclassmen. Every dollar was stretched thin, but it was mine. It was freedom in small, hard-won installments. The one person who quietly cheered me on was my grandmother Clara, my father's mother. She didn't say much when I visited her tiny apartment on weekends, but she always looked at me like she saw me. Like she knew exactly who I was and what I was trying to escape. One day, in her kitchen over warm apple pie, she took my hand and said, "Don't ever let someone else's small view of the world trap you. You've got more in you than they can handle. That's why they try to break it." She passed away during my second year at Northwestern. The grief hit hard, but in the weeks that followed, I received a letter from her attorney. Clara had left me a small inheritance. Nothing extravagant, but enough to help cover tuition and get me through without drowning completely in debt. I cried when I read the letter. It was the first time I felt like someone had believed in my future, not just my obedience. After graduation, I moved into a tiny studio and started as a junior analyst at a mid-sized finance firm. I worked long hours, took on the projects no one else wanted, and learned fast. I didn't have connections or a safety net, but I had grit. I rose through the ranks steadily, eventually becoming one of the youngest finance executives in my department. My paycheck didn't just represent money, it was proof. Proof that I had built something from nothing. Proof that I wasn't who they said I was. Madison, meanwhile, drifted. She bounced between majors, then between jobs, always calling home for help when things got hard. My mother still coddled her, still called her my poor baby, even as she turned 30 with no direction. I never judged her, but I did notice the way our paths diverged, how the one who'd been favored never learned to stand, while the one who was pushed had no choice but to fly. Clara's voice stayed with me through it all. Her belief in me, quiet and unwavering, was like a second spine when mine wanted to collapse. Every time I signed a new lease, negotiated a raise, or opened a savings account in my name alone, I thought of her. And I kept going. Not because I wanted to prove them wrong anymore, but because I finally believed I could be right about myself. I met Erin at a charity gala hosted by a financial literacy nonprofit. It was the kind of event I usually attended more out of obligation than interest, but that night, something felt different. He wasn't flashy or performative like so many others in the room. He listened more than he spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and laughed with his eyes. We started talking over dessert and didn't stop until the servers were clearing the tables around us. Erin worked in nonprofit operations, helping community centers streamline their budgets and programs. We came from different professional worlds, but we spoke the same language: modesty, purpose, and financial integrity. He wasn't threatened by my ambition, and I wasn't trying to hide behind his presence. There was no performance between us. Just ease. Our relationship grew slowly, but with intention. Dates turned into weekends. Weekends turned into long conversations about values, boundaries, and dreams. By the time he proposed, it didn't feel like a dramatic moment. It felt like a natural step forward. The ring was simple, chosen together. The wedding we planned was thoughtful, modest, and ours. We wanted it to be about joy, not spectacle. That's when the calls started again. My mother called under the pretense of congratulating me, but the conversation quickly turned. She mentioned financial struggles, hospital bills, unexpected expenses, and how hard things were for Madison. She reminded me how much they'd sacrificed for me growing up. It was always layered, never direct. Guilt disguised as concern. Obligation wrapped in manipulation. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. That hesitation opened the door, and the requests escalated. First, it was a few hundred. Then it was a few thousand. When I hesitated again, she got sharper, colder, accusing me of turning my back on my family. I felt that familiar guilt start to rise, threatening to drown me. But this time, I wasn't alone. I had Aaron, whose calm steadiness never wavered. I had Alicia, my best friend since college, who had walked beside me through every high and low. And I had therapy, a space I had once resisted but had slowly come to rely on. A place where I could finally untangle what was mine to carry and what never should have been handed to me. It wasn't easy. Saying no never is, especially when you've spent your life being the fixer. But with every boundary I drew, I felt a little more grounded in the life I had built, one where love wasn't conditional and worth wasn't earned through sacrifice. I chose peace. Not perfection. Not performance. Just peace. And for the first time, it felt like mine. The week leading up to Madison's engagement party was a slow burn of anxiety. I couldn't quite place the feeling at first, just a constant tightness in my chest and the creeping sense that something was going to go wrong. Aaron noticed it before I did. "You've been grinding your teeth in your sleep again," he said gently one morning, handing me coffee. I brushed it off, told him I was just tired. But deep down, I knew better. My body remembered what my mind tried to ignore. The party was being hosted at a rented garden venue just outside the city, an expensive choice for two people who, as far as I knew, were barely holding their heads above water. Madison had recently lost her third job in a year, and Bradley, her fiancé, was working as a part-time music teacher while trying to get his sound studio off the ground. That phrase had become code in our family for "he has no money." Still, the invitations were printed on embossed cardstock. The catering menu included lobster sliders. There was a violinist scheduled for cocktail hour. None of it made sense, unless someone else was footing the bill. And then came the conversation I'd been dreading. It started innocently enough. My mother called one afternoon while I was wrapping up a client report. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "I've been meaning to talk to you about something important," she said. "You know, Madison's always looked up to you. And this party, it's more about celebrating both of you girls in a way." I already knew what was coming. My stomach dropped. She kept going. "We thought with your job and how well you're doing, maybe you could help. Just a little. A few things here and there. Nothing too much." It wasn't a request. It never was. It was framed as duty, expectation, and guilt. I tried to stay calm. I wasn't asked to contribute. I thought this was already planned and paid for. A pause. "Well, we assumed you'd want to. It's family, Rebecca. You don't turn your back on family when they need you." I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. The words felt like a knife twisting old wounds. Aaron, standing nearby, met my eyes and shook his head slowly. I nodded back, small but firm. "I can't help financially," I said, my voice low but steady. "I'm not in a position to do that right now." Silence. When she finally spoke, her voice had gone cold. "Of course not. Why would you help your sister? After all we've done?" She hung up without saying goodbye. The days that followed were tight with tension. I knew she'd tell Madison. I knew the story would be twisted into something cruel. I kept waiting for the fallout, but it didn't come in words. It came in looks. At the party, Madison barely acknowledged me. Bradley didn't make eye contact. My mother smiled widely for photos but didn't speak to me once. Still, I smiled. I drank champagne. I posed when asked. But underneath the surface, I was unraveling. The years of pressure, manipulation, and conditional love had all led to this moment. And though I didn't know exactly how it would explode, I felt it coming like a storm on the edge of a too-silent sky. Madison had always loved the spotlight, but that night, she practically bathed in it. The engagement party had somehow become a full-blown wedding preview. Oversized posters of their couple's photos lined the garden entrance. There was a slideshow running on loop, complete with cheesy music and staged candids. At one point, they even unveiled a giant mock-up of their dream wedding vision board, with Parisian floral arrangements, a beachfront ceremony, and custom calligraphy. I stared at it all, blinking in disbelief. I stood off to the side, sipping sparkling water and trying not to make eye contact with anyone. Aaron stayed close, his hand occasionally brushing mine, his way of letting me know he was there. I needed that anchor more than I admitted. Then came the microphone moment. My mother, never one to pass up a dramatic entrance, clinked her glass and asked for everyone's attention. She gave a flowery toast to Madison and Bradley, gushing about their timeless love, how supportive the family had been, and how some people just don't understand the meaning of loyalty. I felt everyone's eyes flick toward me. It was subtle, but sharp. Her weapon always had been shame wrapped in velvet. I didn't react. I smiled politely, even as my hands curled into fists at my sides. Later, just as I was making an excuse to leave early, she cornered me near the caterer's station. Her smile was tight, her voice low enough not to be overheard. "We need 50,000. I blinked, stunned. "What?" "For the wedding. Madison's dream day. We have already put down deposits. We thought you'd step up, help your sister have the day she deserves. After all, you can afford it." "No," I said, before I could even think. "Not." She narrowed her eyes. "You're doing well. You live in that fancy high-rise. You don't even have kids. What are you hoarding it for?" I took a breath, steadying myself. "I'm not responsible for your choices or hers. You didn't ask, you assumed. And I'm done being the backup plan." She stepped closer, her voice now a hiss. "You're selfish. Cold. After everything I did for you." I felt the rage in her building, same as it had so many times before. But I didn't flinch this time. I stood tall, even as the air between us tightened. Then it happened. In one swift motion, she grabbed the untouched coffee cup from the bar behind her, still steaming, and threw it straight at me. The liquid hit my face and neck before I even registered what was happening. The burn was instant. I gasped, staggering back. The world spun, and then silence crashed in. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone screamed. Madison dropped her champagne glass. The violinist stopped mid-note. My dress clung to my skin, the heat from the coffee searing through fabric and flesh. I heard Aaron yell my name, felt his arms catch me just as my knees gave out. My mother stood there, frozen, her hand still slightly raised. Her expression was blank, as if she didn't quite understand what she'd done, or maybe she did, and just didn't care. Madison looked stunned, her lips parted in disbelief. But she didn't move. Not toward me. Not toward our mother. She just stood there, staring. Everything was chaos, voices overlapping, someone calling for help, a waiter bringing ice. But inside, I felt a strange, eerie calm. This was it. The mask had fallen. The secret no longer lived in whispers or behind closed doors. Everyone had seen. And somehow, even through the pain, I felt relief. Not because it didn't hurt, it did. But because I was finally free of pretending. I was still trembling when Aaron reached me. His arms wrapped around me like a barrier, warm, solid, safe. The pain from the burns throbbed, but it was dull compared to the ache of humiliation. My skin stung, my dress was soaked, and the weight of every memory threatened to crush me. But Aaron's voice cut through the noise, calm and clear. "That's enough," he said, stepping between me and my mother, his voice carrying across the stunned silence of the garden. You've done enough. My mother blinked at him, stunned for once into silence. Aaron turned, addressing the crowd that had frozen mid-celebration. You all just saw what happened. But what you didn't see, what none of you know, is what Rebecca has carried for this family for years. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. His words carried a weight all their own. When the mortgage on her parents' house was about to default, she stepped in and paid 6 months behind the scenes. No thanks, no recognition, just guilt and blame. When Madison couldn't finish college because of her debt, Rebecca paid off her loans. Quietly, anonymously. You know that car Madison drives? Rebecca co-signed for it. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. Madison's face twisted in confusion. Wait, what? Aaron looked straight at her. She didn't tell you because she didn't want to embarrass you. That's who she is. She's spent her entire life trying to protect people who've never done the same for her. Bradley took a step forward, eyes narrowing. If she had all that money, why wouldn't she just help with the wedding? Aaron's laugh was sharp, humorless. Because it was never about help. It was about control. And control has a price that Rebecca's done paying. My mother's expression darkened, but she said nothing. Her silence was louder than any denial could have been. Madison looked around helplessly, caught between what she believed and what she was hearing. I didn't know, she said, barely above a whisper. No one told me. I met her eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. Just sadness. You weren't supposed to know, I said quietly. That's how it always worked. Keep you innocent. Keep me responsible. Bradley, eyes flicking between us, tried again. Okay, but if you can afford it, why not just give her the money now? What's the big deal? Aaron turned to him with a stare that made even him step back. Because this isn't about money. It never was. It's about respect. And enough is finally. I looked around at the guests, most of them unsure where to look, murmuring in awkward clumps. Some stared at me with sympathy, others with embarrassment. But I didn't care anymore. The performance was over. I turned to my mother. You don't get to hurt me anymore. Not publicly, not privately, not ever again. She didn't respond. Just looked away, lips pressed tight, still clinging to her version of the story even as it unraveled at her feet. Aaron offered me his arm, and I took it without hesitation. As we walked away, the garden behind us faded into a quiet hum of whispers and stunned silence. Madison didn't follow. Neither did anyone else. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for walking out. I felt free. The emergency room was cold and quiet in the early hours of the morning. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly above me as a nurse gently applied ointment to the burns along my neck and jawline. The pain had dulled by then, but the shock lingered. I watched the clock tick slowly forward while Aaron sat beside me, never letting go of my hand. The doctor assured me the burns were first degree, painful but not permanent. I nodded, numb. But I knew the deeper wounds weren't the ones on my skin. The physical healing took days. The emotional healing would take far longer. I started going to therapy twice a week. At first, I spoke in circles, detached, analytical, like I was reporting on someone else's life. My therapist listened patiently, occasionally redirecting me when I drifted into blame or guilt. It took weeks before I could even say the words, "My mother hurt me," without instinctively defending her. But slowly, the layers began to peel back. I confronted the years of silence, the buried shame, the way I'd trained myself to tolerate pain just to avoid rejection. I let go of the idea that being strong meant being unaffected. I let myself grieve the childhood I never really had. Family members started reaching out once the story got around, some with genuine concern, others with veiled curiosity or outright opportunism. A couple of cousins sent quiet messages of support. One aunt called to say she always knew something was wrong, but didn't want to get involved. My mother, predictably, didn't apologize. Instead, she sent a long email accusing me of humiliating her and letting outsiders judge private matters. I didn't reply. Aaron was my constant. He held space for everything, my tears, my rage, my silence. He never tried to fix me. He just stayed, steady and present. We grew even closer in those weeks. There was no pretending anymore. No curated image, no need to perform. I was raw and real, and he loved me in that space. One evening, as we sat curled up on the couch, I asked him if he regretted getting involved with someone like me, with a family like mine. He shook his head without hesitation. You didn't come from them. You came through them. That's different. Madison surprised me, though. She called a few weeks after the party. Her voice was quiet, different. No defensive edge. No performative sadness. I didn't know, she said. About the money. About how things were for you. I think I didn't want to know. I didn't say much. I just let her talk. Over time, we started having real conversations, not about fixing things, but about understanding. She admitted she'd lived in a bubble, one carefully built for her by our mother. She started going to therapy, too. Slowly, she was beginning to face the truth, just like I had to. I don't know what our relationship will become, but for the first time, it's rooted in honesty, not roles. And that's something. Healing isn't linear. Some days, I still flinch at unexpected sounds. Some nights, I wake up with my jaw clenched. But more and more, I also wake up with peace. With clarity. With a life that feels like mine, not a performance, not a survival tactic. I stopped trying to fix a family that never saw me. I started choosing the people who do. We got married at a quiet lighthouse overlooking the lake, just as the sun began to set. There were no chandeliers, no flower walls, no spectacle, just soft waves, handwritten vows, and the people who truly saw us. It wasn't the wedding I used to imagine as a little girl. It was better. It was real. As I stood in the small dressing room before the ceremony, Madison knocked gently and peeked in. She looked different, calmer, softer somehow. She stepped forward, then opened her hand. I wanted you to have this, she said, holding out our grandmother Clara's bracelet. A delicate gold chain with a single sapphire in the center. She always said you had her strength. I think she'd want you to wear it today. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just nodded and let her clasp it around my wrist. We didn't need to say everything out loud. The gesture said enough. Our father surprised me, too. After years of quiet absence, he'd started reaching out, small things at first. A message here, a check-in there. Then one afternoon, he called just to ask how I was, not to pass on news or ask for anything. At the wedding, he walked me down the aisle. Not because tradition demanded it, but because I asked him, and this time he showed up. Madison stood beside me as my maid of honor. We didn't pretend everything was perfect, but we were trying. With honesty, not performance. And that was more than I'd ever expected. When I looked into Aaron's eyes as we said our vows, I didn't just feel love. I felt grounded. Seen. Safe. Not because he saved me, but because I'd finally saved myself and invited someone in who didn't ask me to be anyone else. Healing had taught me something important. Boundaries are not walls. They're doors I get to open and close. Power isn't control. It's the ability to choose how I love, who I trust, what I carry. As we stood together under the soft light of the setting sun, I didn't think about what had been taken from me. I thought about what I had built. Piece by piece. Choice by choice. I used to survive to prove I was strong. Now I live because I finally believe I deserve to.